The notary looked at me like I was the criminal. "Sir, this is your signature," she said, tapping the document with a manicured nail. "Notarized, witnessed, dated the same week your father passed." I stared at the loop of that D in Daniel, the little tail on the Y that wasn't mine. I hadn't been in that office. I hadn't signed anything. My hands were cold, and the fluorescent lights in that county records room suddenly felt like they were burning. "I was in Ohio that week," I said. "I have flight records, hotel records. I wasn't anywhere near this office." She didn't answer. She just slid the folder toward me so I could see it for myself, and that's when I saw my sister's name on the witness line. Melissa. My own sister had signed off on a document that stole my inheritance right out from under me, and she'd done it believing I would never find out. She was wrong. 3 weeks earlier, my father, Robert Cole, had died in a hospital bed in Dayton, with an oxygen mask fogging up every breath, and I'd held his hand while a machine beeped out the last rhythm of his heart. He was 74. A retired auto mechanic who'd built a small repair shop from nothing, who used to tell me that hard work was the only inheritance that mattered, right before he'd hand me a set of keys or a stack of invoices he wanted me to double-check. I flew back to Ohio for the funeral, sat in the front pew next to my sister, and watched her cry into a tissue like her heart was breaking, and I believed every second of it. I had no idea that while I was picking out a casket with her, she was already 3 steps ahead of me, moving pieces on a board I didn't even know existed. Melissa was 45, 2 years older than me, a real estate agent with a smile that could sell swampland to a duck, and a talent for making you feel like whatever she wanted was somehow your idea too. She had a house in a nice subdivision outside Columbus, a leased SUV, 2 kids in private school, and a level of debt that nobody in our family knew about until it was far too late. I found that out the hard way, standing in that records office, holding a photocopy of a will amendment that gave her 70% of our father's estate instead of the even split he'd promised both of us for years. My name was on that amendment. My signature, a signature I never wrote. I remember my stomach dropping the way it does on the first hill of a roller coaster, that sick lurch when the ground disappears and you realize you can't stop what's already in motion. "Are you sure you didn't sign this?" The notary asked again, gentler this time, like she could see the color draining out of my face. "I'm positive," I said. "I want a copy of everything in this file, today." She hesitated, then said the words that would change the next 6 months of my life. "There's also a video log. We record every notarization now for fraud prevention. I can pull the footage if you want it." I wanted it more than I'd wanted anything in years. Because if I was right, if that video showed someone who wasn't me sitting in that chair, then my sister hadn't just lied to me at our father's funeral. She'd stolen from a dead man's grave while the dirt was still soft. I need you to understand something about my family before I go any further, because none of this makes sense without it, and honestly, some of you are already guessing wrong about who the bad guy really is here. Our father wasn't rich in the way people think of rich. He didn't have yachts or stock portfolios. What he had was a shop on the edge of town worth about $400,000, a modest house paid off after 30 years, and a savings account he'd built one oil change at a time. To some families, that's nothing. To ours, it was everything, because it represented 40 years of a man getting his hands dirty, so his kids wouldn't have to struggle the way he did. Melissa had struggled anyway. Not the kind of struggle you talk about at Thanksgiving, but the kind that shows up in your credit score and your marriage, and the way you flinch when your phone rings and it's an unknown number. Her husband, Craig, had lost his job at a logistics company 18 months before our father died, and instead of downsizing, they doubled down, refinancing the house, leasing a new car, keeping up appearances at every HOA barbecue like nothing was wrong. I didn't know any of that at the time. I found out later, piece by piece, the way you find out about a house fire, from the smell first, and then the smoke, and then finally the flames. What I did know was that my father called me 2 months before he died, sitting in his recliner with the phone pressed to his ear, and told me he wanted to split everything 50-50 between me and Melissa. No arguments, no exceptions. "I don't want you two fighting over this when I'm gone," he said. "You're both my kids. You both get the same." I told him I trusted him to handle it, and he said he was already working with a lawyer downtown to get the paperwork clean and simple. That lawyer's name was on the amendment too. Except when I called his office 3 days after finding that folder, his assistant told me something that made my blood run cold. "Mr. Whitfield retired last spring," she said. "We haven't handled any Cole estate documents since then, so who drew up the amendment?" I sat in my truck in that parking lot for almost 20 minutes without turning the key, just staring at the dashboard, running through every conversation I'd had with my sister since the funeral, looking for the crack in her performance. She'd been so careful, so convincingly grief-stricken. She'd even cried on my shoulder in the hospital hallway and said, "We're all we've got left now, Danny," using the nickname only she was allowed to call me. I remembered thinking, in that hallway, that whatever happened with the estate, we'd figure it out together, because that's what family does. I didn't know yet that together meant something very different to her than it did to me. The video came through my email 4 days later, a grainy file from the county's notary log, time-stamped for a Tuesday afternoon in March, 1 week after our father's funeral, when I was 700 miles away sitting in my own office in Ohio approving construction change orders. I clicked play with my hand actually shaking. A woman walked into frame wearing a blazer. I recognized because I'd seen it in a photo from Melissa's real estate listing page. She sat down, signed a document with quick practice strokes, and for 1/2 of a second, before she looked away from the camera, her face was clearly visible. It was Melissa. She had impersonated me, sat in that chair, in front of a licensed notary, and forged my name on a legal document that redirected the majority of our father's estate straight into her own bank account. I watched the video 4 more times that night, sitting alone in my kitchen with a beer going warm in front of me, trying to find some explanation that didn't end with my sister being a criminal. I couldn't find one. What I found instead was a text message thread I'd almost forgotten about, from the week of the funeral, where Melissa had asked me to just sign a few extra copies of some paperwork she said the lawyer needed for the house transfer. I never signed anything. I told her I was swamped with work and asked her to mail it to me. She said she'd take care of it. Now I understood exactly what taking care of it meant. I called my wife, Rachel, into the kitchen and showed her the video without saying a word. Just turned the laptop toward her and watched her face go through the same shock I'd felt an hour earlier. "That's her," Rachel said quietly. "Danny, that's actually her." "I know," I said, and my voice came out flatter than I expected, like something inside me had already started shutting down to protect itself. "What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer yet, not a real one. Because part of me, the part that still remembered her holding my hand at our mother's funeral 15 years earlier, wanted to believe there was some explanation that made this forgivable. The other part of me, the part that had just watched hard video evidence of felony forgery, knew exactly what this was. I decided that night I wasn't going to call her and scream. I wasn't going to text her in anger. I was going to do something my father taught me a long time ago, back when I was a teenager who wanted to fight every kid who wronged me. "Don't swing first," he used to say. "Swing smart." So instead of confronting Melissa, I made an appointment with an estate litigation attorney named Karen Ibarra, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd handled dozens of inheritance disputes and had a framed diploma from Ohio State on the wall behind a desk covered in case files. I laid everything out for her. The amendment, the forged signature, the video. The lawyer who apparently retired before the document was even drafted. She watched the footage twice, then leaned back in her chair and said something that made the whole thing feel suddenly terrifyingly real. "Mr. Cole, this isn't just a civil matter," she said. "What you're describing is forgery and fraud. Depending on the value of the estate, we could be looking at felony charges. I don't want her in prison." I heard myself say, and I meant it, even then. "I just want what's mine. What my father wanted me to have." "That's your choice to make," Karen said. "But I want you to understand your options before you decide anything, because right now, you have more leverage than you know." She was right. I just didn't know how much more evidence was waiting to surface, or how deep the dead hole Melissa had dug herself into actually went. That's the thing about betrayal from someone you love. It never comes in one clean cut. It comes in layers, and every time you think you've found the bottom, there's another one underneath. The next layer showed up 2 weeks later, in the form of a phone call from a woman named Teresa Wells, our father's neighbor for almost 20 years, a retired school teacher who still watered his tomato plants out of habit even after he was gone. "Danny, honey, I probably shouldn't be calling you about this," she said, her voice tight with the kind of guilt that comes from knowing something you feel obligated to share. "But I saw your sister at the house 3 days after your daddy passed, before the funeral even." My stomach tightened. "What was she doing there, Pat?" She had a man with her. Older fella, suit and tie, carrying a briefcase. They were inside for almost 2 hours. "I figured it was funeral stuff, but honey, they left with boxes." "Boxes? What kind of boxes?" "Filing boxes. The kind lawyers use." And Danny, I hate to say this, but she looked over her shoulder the whole time like she didn't want anybody seeing her. I thanked Patricia and hung up the phone. Sitting in my truck outside my son's little league practice, watching him take batting practice like the whole world hadn't just tilted sideways again. Someone had been in my father's house going through his private papers 3 days after his death, before the funeral, before the will was even read, and my sister had let them in. Who was he? I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Rachel in the dark, running numbers in my head, trying to figure out what could possibly be in those boxes that Melissa needed before anyone else could see them. Bank statements, insurance policies. Maybe the original, unaltered will, the one my father had actually signed with a retired lawyer, before whoever this new man was had drafted a version more favorable to her. If that original will still existed somewhere, it would prove everything. I called Karen the next morning, told her about Patricia's call, and for the first time since I'd hired her, I heard genuine excitement in her voice. If there's an original will out there that contradicts the amendment, she said, this case just got a whole lot stronger. We need to find out who that man was. It took us 9 days, 3 phone calls to local law offices, and one very awkward conversation with our father's longtime insurance agent before we finally got a name. Gregory Hawley, not a lawyer at all. A document preparation consultant who ran a small storefront business 2 towns over, the kind of place that skirts the edge of legal services without quite crossing into practicing law, and who apparently had a reputation among certain families for being flexible about what he was willing to notarize. Karen made a call to a colleague who'd dealt with Hawley before, and what she found out made my blood boil in a completely different way than before. He's been investigated twice for document fraud, she told me over the phone. Never convicted. Settles quietly, changes his business name, keeps operating. Danny, your sister didn't stumble into this by accident. She found someone who specializes in exactly this kind of thing. That was the moment the shock in my chest turned into something colder. Something closer to rage, but controlled, the kind my father used to warn me about. Anger makes you loud, he told me once, fixing a transmission with grease up to his elbows. Smart makes you dangerous. I wanted to be dangerous. But before I could plan my next move, Melissa called me herself, and everything I thought I understood about this situation shifted one more time. Her voice was different than I expected, not defensive, not angry. Tired, in a way that sounded almost hollow, like she'd been carrying something heavy for so long her arms had gone numb. Danny, we need to talk. In person, just you and me. Every instinct told me to say no, to let Karen handle everything through official channels and keep my mouth shut until we had a courtroom to do the talking. But some part of me, the part that still remembered being 9 years old and watching her teach me to ride a bike in our driveway, needed to hear whatever she was about to say. Fine, I said. The diner on Route 9, Saturday morning. Thank you, she said, and her voice cracked just slightly on those 2 words, in a way that almost made me doubt everything I already knew. I told Karen about the meeting, and she wasn't thrilled. Don't say anything that commits you to a position, she warned. And Danny, listen to me carefully. Whatever she tells you, remember you already have video proof. Don't let sympathy talk you out of what you saw with your own eyes. I promised her I wouldn't. I wasn't entirely sure I could keep that promise. The diner was one of those small-town places with cracked vinyl booths and a bell over the door. The kind of place our father used to take us for pancakes when we were kids, back before either of us had learned how to lie to each other. Melissa was already sitting in a corner booth when I walked in, wearing no makeup, her hair pulled back in a way I hadn't seen since our mother's funeral, looking smaller somehow than the confident real estate agent who sold $1 million listings on the weekends. You look tired, I said, sliding into the booth across from her. I haven't slept right in months, she said. Since before Dad died, actually. I waited. I'd learned that much from watching my father negotiate with difficult customers over the years. Silence makes people talk. Craig lost his job, she finally said. Almost 2 years ago now. We didn't tell anybody because I didn't want anybody to know we were struggling. You know how it is at the HOA meetings, everybody comparing whose kitchen got remodeled. Melissa, I don't care about the HOA meetings. I care that you forged my signature on a legal document. Her face went pale, but she didn't deny it. That silence told me more than any confession could have. How did you? There's a video, Melissa. Every notarization gets recorded now. I have it. I've had it for 3 weeks. She put her face in her hands, and for a moment, I thought she might actually cry. Real tears this time, not the performance from the funeral. I was going to lose the house, she said, her voice muffled. We were 3 months behind on the mortgage. Craig's severance ran out. The kid's tuition was due. I didn't know what else to do. So you decided stealing from me was the answer? From Dad's estate, 3 days after he died? I was going to pay you back. she said, lifting her head, and there was something in her eyes that looked almost like she believed it. I swear to you, Danny, I was going to sell the shop, sell the house, and give you your share once things settled down. I just needed time. You needed time, I repeated. So you found a man who's been investigated for fraud twice, forged my signature, and rewrote Dad's will to give yourself 70%, and you're telling me that was a temporary solution. She flinched as 70%, like hearing the exact number out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I know how it looks, she said. It looks like a felony, Melissa. Because that's what it is. The waitress came by to refill our coffee, and we both went quiet, performing the strange social ritual of pretending everything was normal for the 10 seconds it took her to walk away, and then the silence between us got even heavier. What are you going to do? Melissa finally asked. I don't know yet, I said, and it was the truth. But I want you to know something. I found out about Gregory Hawley. I know he's not a real lawyer. I know his history. Her face went from pale to gray. And I know somebody came to the house 3 days after Dad died and left with boxes of his papers. Boxes, Melissa? What was in them? She stared down at her coffee cup like it might have an answer written in the foam. There's something else, she said quietly. Something I haven't told you. Something about Dad's real will, the one he actually signed with Mr. Whitfield before he retired. My heart started pounding. What about it? She looked up at me, and for the first time in that whole conversation, I saw something in her expression I hadn't expected. Not guilt. Fear. Is not what you think, Danny. Dad changed his mind about something before he died. Something about the shop. And I think that's part of why I panicked. What do you mean, changed his mind? She opened her mouth to answer, and that's exactly when her phone buzzed on the table between us, the screen lighting up with a name that made her whole body go rigid. Craig. She stared at it for a long moment before turning it face down without answering. Who's calling? I asked. And why does it look like you just saw a ghost? It's nothing, she said, too quickly. Craig just worries when I'm not home. I didn't believe her, and something told me the real story was about to get a lot bigger than a desperate sister forging a signature to cover a mortgage payment. I was right. Because 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. And the voice on the other end introduced herself as a fraud investigator with the county prosecutor's office. And she asked me a question that changed everything I thought I understood about this case. Mr. Cole, are you aware that your sister and her husband have been named in a separate investigation involving Gregory Hale's document preparation business? I sat down hard on my kitchen stool. A separate investigation? Mr. Hawley has been under surveillance for 6 months, she said. Yours isn't the first family that's come forward. We believe he's helped forge at least 4 estate documents across 2 counties, and your sister's name came up during an earlier interview with one of the other victims. The floor felt like it was tilting under me. This wasn't just about my father's will anymore. This was a criminal enterprise, and my sister was tangled up in it far deeper than a single desperate afternoon in a notary's office. What do you need from me? I asked. Your video evidence would be extremely valuable, she said. But I have to be honest with you, Mr. Cole. Once this goes to the grand jury, it's out of your hands. This won't be something you can quietly settle within the family anymore. I thought about Melissa's face in that diner booth, the way she'd flinched when her phone lit up with Craig's name, the way she'd started to tell me about something Dad had changed before he died and then shut down completely. There's more to this story, I told the investigator. I think my sister knows things I don't. About my father's actual wishes. About Craig's involvement. I think if you push, you'll find out this goes deeper than just my case. That's exactly the kind of thing we need to know before we move, she said. Are you willing to meet with us formally? Give a statement? I looked out my kitchen window at Rachel in the backyard, pushing our daughter on the tire swing my father had helped me hang 2 summers ago, back when he was still healthy enough to climb a ladder. He deserved the truth, whatever it cost. Yes, I said. I'm ready. That decision set off a chain of events I couldn't have predicted. Starting with a certified letter that arrived at Melissa's house 3 days later, informing her that she was officially under criminal investigation for forgery and estate fraud. She called me that night sobbing, but this time I didn't feel the pull to soften, because I already knew there was more she hadn't told me, and I wasn't going to let sympathy stop me from finding out what it was. You went to the police, she said, her voice shaking with something between grief and betrayal, as if I was the one who'd done something wrong. I went to the truth, Melissa. You're the one who buried it. You don't understand what's really going on here, she said. Craig is the one who found Gregory Hawley. Craig set the whole thing up. I just signed where he told me to sign. I felt my jaw tighten. You're telling me your husband masterminded forging my signature on our father's estate? It's more complicated than that, she said. And there was a long pause before she added, in a voice barely above a whisper. Danny, Craig's been doing this before. Before Dad, there were other families. I didn't know at first, I swear I didn't know, and by the time I found out, I was already in too deep to say no. The room around me seemed to shrink. Other families? Elderly clients of his old logistics company. People whose estates got, I don't know, redirected. He used Gregory the same way with them. I didn't understand it was a pattern until it was already too late for me to walk away. I thought about the investigator's words, 4 families across 2 counties. This wasn't a one-time act of desperation. This was a system, and my sister had let her husband use our father's death as the next opportunity in a scheme that had been running for years. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because Craig found out I met you at the diner, she said, and her voice dropped to something close to fear. He's furious. He thinks I'm going to turn on him. Danny, I'm scared of what he might do if he thinks I'm cooperating with anyone. For the first time since I found that forged signature, the anger in my chest made room for something else. Concern for the sister who had betrayed me mixed uncomfortably with the memory of the girl who used to walk me to the bus stop when we were kids and Mom worked early shifts. Are you safe right now? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. He's been different since I told him about the investigation. Colder. He keeps saying I need to protect the family. His version of protecting the family, not ours. I told her to get somewhere safe, somewhere with people around, and to call the investigator directly if she felt like she was in danger. And then I hung up and sat in my dark kitchen for a long time staring at nothing. My sister had wronged me in a way that was almost unforgivable. But now it looked like she might have been a pawn in something even bigger than the theft of my father's estate, married to a man who'd built an entire criminal pattern on the backs of grieving families. I called Corinne first thing the next morning and told her everything. This changes the shape of your case significantly, she said. If Melissa cooperates against Craig, and if the prosecution can establish a pattern of prior fraud, you're looking at a much stronger position, both for recovering the estate and for how the criminal charges get structured. I don't want to destroy her, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. I want justice. I want what Dad wanted for me. But I don't want to be the reason she loses everything if she's willing to make this right. Corinne was quiet for a moment. That's not a decision you have to make today. Let's focus on building an airtight case, and we can figure out mercy once the facts are all on the table. 2 weeks passed in a strange, tense limbo, where I went to work every day, coached my son's little league team on weekends, and tried to act like my life was normal while a criminal investigation unraveled around my family in the background. Then Patricia Wells called me again, this time with news that made everything click into place. Danny, I found something in your father's mailbox, she said. I've been collecting his mail like I always did, meaning to give it to whoever handled the estate, and there's a letter here from a law firm in Cincinnati. Whitfield and Associates. My pulse quickened. The retired lawyer's old firm? That's the one. It's addressed to your father, but it's dated just 2 weeks before he passed. I asked her to open it and read it to me, and what she found inside was the missing piece that would ultimately bring the entire case together. It was a confirmation letter, referencing a final will my father had signed personally with Mr. Whitfield before his retirement. The original document, notarized and witnessed properly, splitting the estate evenly between me and Melissa, exactly as he'd always promised. The letter also mentioned that a signed copy had been placed in a safety deposit box at our father's credit union, box number 214, for safekeeping until his passing. I hadn't even known that box existed. I drove to that credit union the next morning with a certified copy of the death certificate and the original letter Patricia had found, and after 2 hours of paperwork and a phone call to verify my identity as executor, a bank employee led me to a small quiet room and opened box 214 with a second key. Inside was a manila envelope with my father's handwriting on the front. For Danny and Melissa. Together like it should be. My hands shook as I opened it, and there it was, the original will, signed and dated 8 months before his death, splitting everything 50-50, exactly as he'd told me on the phone that day in his recliner. There was also something else in the envelope. A separate handwritten letter. Just for me. That I read standing right there in that little vault room with tears running down my face before I could stop them. Danny, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I need you to do something for me. Take care of your sister, even when it's hard. She's not as strong as she looks. And if things ever get complicated with the estate, remember this box exists. I trust you to do right by both of you, I always have. Love, Dad. He had known, somehow in his last months, that things might get complicated. Maybe he sensed Melissa's desperation even before she'd acted on it. Maybe he'd simply been careful, the way a man who'd spent 40 years fixing things that broke down learns to plan for failure before it happens. Either way, he left me exactly what I needed, at exactly the moment I needed it. I called Karen from the parking lot, my voice thick with emotion I couldn't fully explain. I found it, the original will. It's real, Karen. It's everything we needed. Danny, this is enormous, she said. With this, the forged amendment doesn't just look suspicious, it looks conclusively fraudulent. Combined with the video and the investigators' case against Haley and Craig, we have more than enough to move forward completely. I sat in my truck for a long time after that call, holding my father's letter, feeling something I hadn't expected, not triumph, not vindication. Just grief, fresh and sharp, like I was losing him all over again. But underneath the grief was something else too. A quiet, steady kind of strength, the kind he'd always tried to teach me. The kind that comes from doing the right thing, even when it's the hardest thing you've ever had to do. The criminal case moved faster than any of us expected once the county prosecutor's office had the full picture. Craig was arrested first, on a Tuesday morning, walking out of his house in a bathrobe, to find 2 unmarked cars waiting in the driveway. Melissa, true to what she told me on the phone, had already begun cooperating, providing detailed records of Craig's prior schemes, including 2 other families in neighboring counties who'd lost significant portions of elderly relatives' estates to Gregory Hale's fraudulent paperwork. Gregory Hale himself was arrested within the week, his little storefront office shut down, his business license revoked permanently, and it turned out the fraud investigator had been building a case against him for the better part of a year before my father's death ever gave Craig his opening. I sat through 3 separate meetings with the prosecutor's office over the following month, giving statements, reviewing evidence, watching the case take shape piece by piece like a puzzle finally coming together after being scattered across a table for weeks. Melissa was charged too. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy. But because of her cooperation, and because the evidence clearly showed Craig as the architect of a pattern that predated their marriage's financial collapse, the prosecutor offered her a plea deal that avoided prison time in exchange for full restitution and probation. Craig wasn't so fortunate. His pattern of fraud across multiple families, combined with his refusal to cooperate and his attempt to intimidate Melissa into silence, which came out during her testimony, earned him a sentence that would keep him in a state facility for the next several years. The night the plea deals were finalized, Melissa called me, her voice steadier than I'd heard it in months, like some enormous weight had finally been set down after being carried for far too long. I know sorry doesn't fix what I did, she said. I know I can't undo forging your name or trying to steal what Dad wanted you to have, but Danny, I need you to know I am sorry. Not because I got caught. Because of who I let myself become. I found the letter Dad left me, I told her. In the safety deposit box. He asked me to take care of you, even when it was hard. She was quiet for a long moment. What are you going to do? I'm going to follow the will he actually signed, I said. 50-50 like he wanted, even after everything. Because that's what he asked, and because some part of me still believes you can become someone he'd be proud of again. She cried on the phone for a long time, and I let her, not because I'd forgotten what she'd done, but because I understood, finally, that forgiveness and consequences weren't opposites. They could exist in the same room together, the way grief and justice had learned to live side by side in my chest for the past several months. The estate settlement took another 2 months to finalize, but when it was done, everything followed the original will exactly as my father had intended, split evenly, distributed fairly. The shop eventually sold to a longtime employee who'd worked alongside him for 15 years and wanted to keep the business alive under its original name. I used my half to pay off the last of my mortgage and set aside a college fund for my kids, and every time I signed a document afterward, I found myself checking my own signature twice, a small habit born from a wound that would probably never fully close. Melissa sold her house, the big one in a nice subdivision, and moved with her kids into something smaller, something honest, something built on what she actually had instead of what she was pretending to have. She got a job at a local property management company, steady and unglamorous, and started seeing a therapist every week, something she told me she should have done years before any of this happened. We didn't go back to how things used to be. I want to be honest with you about that, because too many stories like this end with a magical, perfect reconciliation that doesn't reflect how real trust actually rebuilds, slowly and perfectly, with plenty of setbacks along the way. We talk now. We have dinner sometimes, with our kids running around together the way we used to run around at our own grandparents' house. But there's a distance that wasn't there before, a carefulness in how we speak to each other, Like two people who both know exactly how badly things can go wrong when you stop paying attention. I think that distance is honest. I think it's healthier than pretending nothing happened, and I think somewhere our father would understand that too, because he was a practical man who believed in fixing what could be fixed and accepting what couldn't. Be honest with me for a second. Would you have forgiven your own sibling after something like this? Would you have followed your father's wishes even after discovering the betrayal, or would you have walked away completely? I'd genuinely like to hear your thoughts in the comments below, because stories like this rarely have a clean, easy answer, and I think we could all learn something from each other's perspectives. It's been almost 2 years now since I sat in that county records office and watched a notary slide a folder across the desk toward me, and I still think about that moment more often than I expected I would. I think about how close I came to never finding out the truth, how if Patricia Wells hadn't happened to look out her window at the right moment, or if that credit union employee hadn't been thorough enough to mention the safety deposit box, this entire story might have ended very differently. I think about my father's letter too, the one that told me to take care of my sister even when it was hard, and I wonder sometimes if he somehow knew in those last months exactly what kind of test he was setting up for both of us. What I know for certain is this. Justice doesn't always look like revenge, sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like collecting evidence quietly while your heart is breaking, and trusting the truth to do the heavy lifting instead of your anger. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't destroy the person who wronged you. It's simply refuse to become someone who lies the way they did, refuse to let their choices decide who you become in response. I still run my hand over my father's old workbench sometimes out in my garage where I moved it after the shop sold, and I think about the man who spent 40 years fixing what was broken, who left behind not just a business and a house, but a lesson about what it really means to do right by the people you love, even when they fail to do right by you. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, someone family, someone who was supposed to have your back no matter what, I want you to know you're not alone in that. Share your story in the comments below, because I've read through hundreds of them on other videos on this channel, and I promise you, someone out there needs to hear that they made it through something similar too. If this story moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the Revenge Diaries, because we bring you a new true-to-life story like this one every single week. Stories about betrayal, about justice, about people finding the strength to stand up for themselves when it matters most. Share this video with someone who understands exactly what a story like this means, someone who's been through their own version of a forged signature, a broken promise, a family member who forgot what loyalty was supposed to look like. And if you want to see what happens when someone doesn't have a father's letter waiting in a safety deposit box to save them, when they have to build their entire case from nothing but instinct and a refusal to give up, stay right where you are, because our next story is waiting for you. And I think you're going to need to see how it ends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.